In the very lands where Christianity was born, ancient communities are fighting for survival. Today, we delve into the profound and turbulent history of the Middle East's forgotten Christian communities, the Copts, Assyrians, Syriacs, and Chaldeans. These groups represent a direct, unbroken link to the apostles, speaking forms of Aramaic, the very language Jesus Christ spoke. Their faith did not arrive with European missionaries, it originated there. To fully grasp their unique survival story under millennia of pressure, a story of cultural persistence and theological independence, you must stay with us until the very end. Please like and subscribe to support our historical investigations. These communities were not peripheral to early Christianity, they were the historical epicenter. The first center of Gentile Christianity was Antioch, in modern-day Turkey, where believers were first called Christians. The earliest organized churches were established in places like Edessa, Urfa, Ctesiphon, near modern Baghdad, and Alexandria. Crucially, the primary language of worship, scripture, and scholarship across this entire region was not Latin or Greek, but Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic. This linguistic and cultural identity meant that while the faith spread quickly westward towards Rome, a vast, thriving, and distinctly Semitic tradition flourished in the East. Their liturgical practices, music, and calendar developed independently of the Roman and Byzantine centers, giving them a unique cultural resilience. However, geography, culture, and, most critically, theological dispute led to the first major schisms that separated these Eastern churches from the powerful, centralized imperial Christianity of the Roman Empire, Byzantium, in the West. The key turning point came in the 5th century, driven by fierce arguments over the nature of Christ, specifically, the relationship between his divinity and humanity. These disputes were fundamentally political, as the Byzantine emperors sought to impose a singular doctrine to maintain imperial unity. The first major separation occurred following the Council of Ephesus in 431 CE. The followers of Nestorius, Patriarch of Constantinople, were condemned for their teaching, which critics claimed unduly separated the divine and human natures of Christ. Exiled from the Roman Empire, these Christians fled eastward into the rival Sasanian Persian Empire, finding safe harbor there and founding the Church of the East, often historically and controversially called Nestorian. The Sasanian rulers, who were frequently at war with the Byzantines, welcomed these schismatics as they were guaranteed anti-Byzantine loyalty. This strategic shift positioned the Church of the East to become the most geographically expansive Christian mission in history, spreading its influence eastward along the Silk Road deep into Central Asia, India, the Malabar Christians, and even reaching the imperial court in China. The second, and perhaps most geographically significant, schism occurred after the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE. This council attempted to definitively declare that Christ possessed two natures, divine and human, united in one person, diophysitism, a doctrine favored by the Byzantine center. However, large, highly developed Christian populations in Egypt and Syria strongly rejected this ruling, adhering instead to Miaphysitism, which asserted the one unified, singular nature of Christ. Because of their rejection of the imperial doctrine, these communities were branded as heretics by the Byzantine state and faced state persecution and marginalization. In Egypt, the Miaphysites became the Coptic Orthodox Church, centered on the Patriarchate of Alexandria. In Syria and Mesopotamia, they became the Syriac Orthodox Church, led by the Patriarch of Antioch. Branded as political and theological dissidents, these groups faced repeated persecution and marginalization from the Byzantine authorities. This created a deep and lasting resentment towards Constantinople. By the time the armies of the new Islamic Caliphate arrived in the 7th century, the local Christian populations in Egypt and Syria often viewed the invading Arabs, paradoxically, as potential liberators from Byzantine imperial and doctrinal oppression and heavy taxation, rather than as conquerors. This historical context of deep-seated dissent and pre-existing separation is crucial to understanding how these highly organized communities survived the subsequent millennia under Islamic rule. The 7th century marked the most profound political shift in the region since the Roman conquest, the rapid expansion of the Islamic Caliphate. For the Christians of the Middle East, this was a paradoxical moment. On one hand, they were subject to a new, non-Christian political power. On the other, they were largely freed from the doctrinal persecution and heavy taxation imposed by the Byzantine state. The vast majority of the population in Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia remained Christian for centuries following the initial Arab conquest. The primary legal mechanism that ensured the survival of these Christian communities was the dhimmi system. The term dhimmi means protected person. Based on Islamic jurisprudence, Christians and Jews were designated as all al-Kitab, people of the book, possessing a legitimate, though superseded, revelation. In exchange for accepting Muslim political sovereignty and paying a specific tax, jizya, the poll tax, and sometimes higher carriage, the land tax, these communities were granted several fundamental rights. Freedom of worship. They were permitted to practice their faith privately and publicly in existing churches. Autonomy. They maintained their own ecclesiastical hierarchy, courts, and legal systems for personal matters, marriage, inheritance. Protection. They were entitled to the protection of the Muslim state against external and internal enemies. While the dhimmi status was far from one of full equality, Christians faced restrictions on building new churches, missionary work among Muslims, holding authority over Muslims, and often had to wear distinguishing clothing. It was, crucially, a pact of survival and coexistence. It allowed their ancient faith structures, liturgies, and languages, Syriac, Coptic, to endure. The survival of these communities for over 1,300 years under various Islamic empires is a testament to the stability and longevity of this system. Far from simply surviving in isolation, these Eastern Christians became essential contributors to the golden age of the Caliphate. The early Muslim rulers, focused on military expansion and administration, initially relied heavily on the existing Byzantine and Sasanian bureaucracies. These bureaucracies were largely staffed by educated Christians. Syriac and Coptic Christians excelled as scribes, bureaucrats, tax collectors, and, most famously, as translators. During the Abbasid Caliphate, especially in the 8th and 9th centuries, Christian scholars played a dominant role in the Beit al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, in Baghdad. Scholars from the Nestorian and Syriac Orthodox traditions, fluent in Syriac, Greek, and Arabic, were responsible for translating massive volumes of Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, mathematics, and medicine into Arabic. Figures like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, an Nestorian Christian, were central to this translation movement, which formed the foundation for the Islamic world's subsequent scientific and intellectual advancements. Without the linguistic skills and scholarly commitment of these Christian intellectuals, much of classical knowledge would not have been preserved for either the Islamic or the later European world. Furthermore, the Church of the East, Nestorians, became one of the greatest missionary forces in history. Supported by the peace and infrastructure of the Caliphate and the Silk Road, they established vast dioceses across Central Asia, reaching Mongolia, and planting churches that endured for centuries in major Chinese cities, a remarkable demonstration of faith expansion originating from the Middle East. The period following the peak of the Abbasid Golden Age brought waves of upheaval that fundamentally altered the demographic and geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, subjecting the ancient Christian communities to intense and often devastating pressure. The comparative stability offered by the early dhimmi system began to erode as the central caliphate weakened and new, less tolerant regional powers emerged. The first major external shock came with the Crusades, 11th to 13th centuries. Ostensibly launched to liberate Christian holy sites from Muslim control, the Crusades were catastrophic for the local Eastern Christian communities. European crusaders, operating under papal authority, often viewed the non-Latin Eastern Christians, Copts, Syriacs, Armenians, with suspicion and outright hostility, branding them as schismatics or even heretics due to the deep theological rifts established centuries earlier at councils like Chalcedon. In the confusion and violence, crusaders frequently attacked Eastern Christian churches, seized their property, and displaced their leaders, viewing them as obstacles to the establishment of Latin Rite control. The trauma caused by the Crusaders led to a profound alienation of local Christians from the West, strengthened the anti-Christian sentiment among Muslim rulers who viewed local Christians as potential collaborators, and ultimately destabilized their already fragile status within the region. The second, even more destructive, shock was the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. Initially, the Mongol armies, especially those led by Hulagu Khan, were surprisingly favorable to the Church of the East, Nestorians. This was partly due to the presence of high-ranking Nestorian Christian women in the Mongol courts. For a brief, fleeting period, the Nestorian Church enjoyed immense imperial favor, and hopes soared that the Mongols might become a major Christian ally capable of restoring a Christian empire. However, this dream was quickly shattered. As the vast Mongol Empire fractured and large swathes of the leadership eventually converted to Islam, the protective layer around the Christians instantly vanished. The subsequent waves of conquest, particularly those under the Turkic Mongol leader Timur, Tamerlane, in the 14th century, were devastating. Timur's campaigns across Persia and Mesopotamia were marked by massacres, resulting in the near annihilation of the once flourishing Christian communities in those areas, effectively pushing the surviving Assyrian populations into the remote mountain regions for survival. Beyond these external military disasters, the communities themselves became increasingly fragmented due to internal schisms and external missions. Beginning from the 16th century, Western Catholic missionaries, Franciscans, Jesuits, and others began extensive work in the Ottoman and Persian empires. Their goal was to bring the ancient Eastern churches back into full communion with Rome. This was not a smooth process. It often resulted in deep splits within the original churches, a process that continues to define their complex identities today. The Chaldean Catholic Church emerged from the Church of the East, maintaining the ancient Syriac liturgy but acknowledging the Pope's authority. The Syriac Catholic Church split from the Syriac Orthodox Church, following the same pattern of maintaining ancient rites while recognizing Rome. The Maronite Church, centered in Mount Lebanon, successfully entered into full communion with Rome without ever splitting, a rare exception to the regional trend. This created the complex mosaic of modern Middle Eastern Christianity: parallel Orthodox, original, and Catholic, Roman-aligned, traditions existing side by side, each with its own patriarch and competing for loyalty and resources. This internal fragmentation, coupled with the external pressures of rising Arab and Turkish nationalism in the 19th and 20th centuries, meant these communities entered the modern era as smaller, often competing entities, severely hindering their ability to act as a unified political or cultural voice. Their deep historical roots became a political vulnerability in an age obsessed with singular, modern national identities. The political, theological, and military pressures of the preceding centuries set the stage for the demographic catastrophe that faced the Middle East's ancient Christian communities in the 20th and 21st centuries. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent rise of aggressive nationalism and identity-based conflict proved far more destructive to their existence than centuries of demi-status. The most severe blow was delivered during and immediately after World War I. In the same general wave of violence that targeted the Armenians, the Assyrian and Syriac Christians were subjected to systematic massacres by Ottoman forces and Kurdish irregulars across modern-day Turkey and Iran. This event, known as Sayfo, the sword in Syriac, or the Assyrian genocide, resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and the near-total destruction of the ancient Christian heartland in southeastern Turkey, Mesopotamia. This forced the survivors to flee to Iraq, Syria, and eventually to the West, scattering their communities globally and drastically reducing their population in their ancestral lands. The creation of modern Arab nation-states initially provided some stability for the surviving groups: the Copts in Egypt, the Maronites in Lebanon, and the Syriacs/Chaldeans in Syria and Iraq. But this stability was built on fragile ground. The rise of political Islam, sectarian tensions, and the continuous regional conflicts, such as the Arab-Israeli wars, led to a steady, constant stream of immigration, as Christians sought safer, more economically prosperous futures outside the unstable region. The final, most destructive wave of persecution came with the Iraq War, 2003, and the subsequent civil war in Syria, 2011. The chaos following the collapse of centralized, authoritarian regimes created a security vacuum exploited by radical extremist groups. The rise of ISIS, Daesh, was particularly devastating. In their attempt to establish a caliphate, ISIS systematically targeted Christian communities, forcing them to convert, pay impossible taxes, or flee immediately. Ancient Christian towns and cities, most tragically the Nineveh Plains, the homeland of the Chaldean and Syriac traditions, and key areas in Syria, were emptied of their Christian inhabitants for the first time in 1,700 years. Churches and monasteries dating back to the 4th century were deliberately desecrated and destroyed. Today, these communities are on the brink of disappearance in their ancestral lands. The demographic collapse is stark. While Christians once constituted a significant minority, in many regions they are now less than 5%. The majority of the world's Assyrian/Syriac population now lives in diaspora, the United States, Sweden, Australia, etc. However, their legacy is monumental. The survival of these communities means the survival of Aramaic, the language of Christ, the preservation of crucial classical texts that fueled the Islamic Golden Age, and the existence of a continuous, indigenous Christian witness in the lands of the Bible. Their history is not just a footnote. It is a testament to the sheer resilience of faith under immense, sustained pressure. By studying these forgotten communities, we gain a crucial, complex understanding of the Middle East that transcends the modern political narrative. Their history is a testament to the sheer resilience of faith under immense pressure, enduring theological schisms, Mongol hordes, and modern genocide. If this deep analysis of their heritage and struggle taught you something new, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of historical endurance. Thank you for staying with us.